Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the fourth session in our five-part series, Let's Talk, Closing the Racial Gap in STEM, today focusing on high school. I'm Martha McCabe, Executive Director of the Kansas City STEM Alliance, and on behalf of our advisory board, our funders, the STEM Connect KC ecosystem leadership team, we thank you for joining us today for an engaging and real conversation. Our team at the KC STEM Alliance has been on a journey involving executive leadership, training, and staff development to better understand systemic racism, implicit bias, gatekeeping that creates education and economic inequities impacting the students and families right here in Kansas City, and to understand what our role can be to support those doing this work and to become even stronger partners and allies. This series represents our efforts in creating a bigger and deeper commitment to this work. And we consider this series as design thinking in action as we listen to our panelists. Late last week, the National Alliance on Partnerships and Equity released a call to action: Equity in CTE and STEM, Root Causes and Strategies. I'll make sure to put a link to the document in the chat in a little bit. This call to action is in alignment with the work that will come out of this Closing the Racial Gap in STEM series, by first beginning to understand our own awareness, understandings, and behaviors of inequity. And then we must understand the root causes of exclusion so that we can identify local best practices to close these gaps. Yesterday in Topeka was actually one of those opportunities to close a gap. I had the opportunity to testify in front of the Board of Education, who ultimately voted 8-2 to allow computer science to count for math or science high school graduation requirement credit, opening up the possibility for more students to explore computer science. This outcome is important because our research and data gathering at the KC STEM Alliance shows that computer science is offered in nearly all of our high schools in Kansas City, but we still do not have gender and, more importantly, racial parity in those classrooms. Providing graduation credit for these courses will help to close the gaps for many students. In Missouri, students have been able to apply CS computer science coursework to graduation credits for the past 2 years, but I'm not certain how many families and students are aware of this opportunity. Well, one of these strategies in helping to close the racial gap in STEM is the strategic hiring of a dedicated staff member focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion, serving with us here at the KC STEM Alliance and in partnership with our larger and broader STEM learning ecosystem here in Kansas City. We are delighted to have an outstanding individual leading this work for our ecosystem, Christina Chandler. Chrissy is a teacher, a computer science and IT professional, and serves as the program delivery partner for First Lego League. Her experience in understanding the value of learning computer science skills and how to translate those skills into a career makes her a perfect fit for working on new education policy around CS as a graduation credit and how she can help us get that information out to our community. She also has a passion for education and inspiring young people to explore and engage in STEM. And it has been an incredible gift to our work here at the KC STEM Alliance. We look forward to her leadership as we embrace even more initiatives to ensure that all young people have the opportunity to explore the world of STEM. I am delighted to introduce you to Chrissy Chandler.
Thank you, Martha, so much for your kind words as always. As you guys can tell, the KC STEM Alliance's work has always been done through the lens of equity, diversity, and inclusion. Martha and the KC STEM Alliance's advocacy has helped us get to the point that we are at today, where she's able to go and speak to the school board in Kansas and make computer science a math credit. That is awesome. And I am so looking forward to continue to engage in this work and build on what the KC STEM Alliance has already done. It has always been a passion of mine to make sure that all students have the opportunity to engage in rich and rigorous STEM learnings. Well, now, alongside Martha and the Casey STEM Alliance, I have the opportunity to turn that passion into action as we continue to ensure that equitable strategies are in place to make sure that all students are engaged in opportunities that prepare them for our STEM workforce. So I thank you so much, Martha. Thank you to the Casey STEM Alliance for the work you've already done. And I thank you all for being here. And I look forward to engaging with you at some point as well. So now it is my privilege to introduce Andrea Ellis, the Director of Strategic Learning for the Kansas City Public Library System, to moderate this series. Her work and advocacy around making sure that all students have access to diverse learning opportunities is helping to move the needle forward for students in our region. Thank you, Andrea, for your hard work and dedication, and I'll hand it off to you now.
Thanks, Chrissy. So as she mentioned, I am Andrea Ellis, the Director of Strategic Learning at the Kansas City Public Library and a Casey STEM Alliance board member. Thank you for sharing your time with us today. This is the fourth of 5 conversations that will be hosted every Wednesday until June 16th, which is next week, is our last one from 11:30 to 12:30 p.m. The focus of this series is to name and acknowledge the barriers to success in STEM for individuals of color, and to recognize and honor where there have been both systemic and personal successes in addressing those barriers. So just a little bit of housekeeping. Both the chat and the Q&A are active. If you have questions for our panelists, please put those in the Q&A. That would make it much easier for our team to be able to find them. The chat you use as you normally would, but also if you have any resources that you think would be useful to other participants, please include that in the chat. We're collecting all of those resources and we'll share them back out at the end of the series. Last note is that there will be a Q&A, an additional Q&A after we officially end at 12:30. So for those who just have a quick lunch break, we wanted to end at the promised time, but we will have an additional 10 minutes to answer any questions that we were not able to get to during the formal Q&A. And now I'm going to take a minute and just introduce Ann Zimmerman, who is acting as the graphic recorder for this series. And Ann is going to give us a brief recap of what came out of last week's conversation. Ann?
Hi, Andrea. Thank you. And thanks to everybody for a great series so far. It's been my delight to get to try to capture this in words and pictures, what our speakers are sharing with us. I will have to tell you, it's quite a tall task because this has been a very rich conversation, but I'll do my best to take you on a little bit of a tour, a graphic tour of what we talked about last week. So Crystal Ferris was with us from the KC Public Library, and she is the Director of Youth and Family Engagement. So has this very deep knowledge of just what works with young people. And she talked about some research that came out of the Search Institute around brain development. And the big message here is it's under construction for our teenagers. Very similar to toddlers, during the teenage years, there are these massive changes happening in the brain. And so we're losing all sorts of synapses and we're creating new ones. So lots of changes in language and movement. So if you're wondering why that middle school boy is squirming in the seats, this is why. But it also called out this very real necessity for trusting relationships at this point of their lives. And so they basically found that teens need at least 2 positive relationships with adults who are not related to them. So think about the role of a coach, of a teacher, of a counselor, of somebody in an after-school setting who really allows that child a chance to explore something new and learn more about themselves. She called out several qualities of how a trusted adult should be interacting with young people, to actively listen to them. And that means looking at them and giving them your full attention. To say, I care about you, you're valuable, and your opinions have value. So an active way to do that is to ask regularly for their input. And so asking for input and validating that their opinions have value. So she also called out the fact that this is a fantastic time to introduce them to new ideas. She told a wonderful story about building volcanoes and having the young people learn alongside and having fun alongside the adults in that learning process. and letting the students know that they too can teach other people. And of course, I had the friends in there because we know peers are truly and really an important part of their life at this point. So that group learning is really important. Then we moved on to a great panel discussion. Crystal joined Philania Johnson and Brittany Mojico and Dr. Phil Jones, and they chatted about their different perspectives. So starting with Philania, who is now an accounting major at UMKC, she talked about her STEM journey and this need to look for your STEM path, that it's unique to every student. And so she talked about having lots of opportunities for hands-on real world learning while she was in school. She did the engineering program. She tried computer science. She tried enough things to realize that I'm interested in this STEM. But what really drew her to accounting was she had a job at a bank and said, I just like the numbers thing. So, so she ended up in accounting, which is still, of course, related to STEM. And she also called out this need to get involved with other activities and to stay motivated. She had a teacher who really motivated her to keep her grades up, which really influenced her success. We also talked to Brittany, who is the lead fabricator at MindDrive that does all sorts of awesome after school and in-school activities around robotics and drone racing. And so those little pictures are not flies on my drawing, those are drones. But just this opportunity to enjoy learning with and alongside youth. They need to see our vulnerability in that learning process so that they can explore all sorts of new things. And she called out this, the inequities that often happen for young people of color, that they might get introduced to something in school or after school, but once they go home, they don't have the same access to equipment, to the resources, to parents that can help them, encourage them in that work, or even connectivity. So just a call to improving on that equity. And then Dr. Phil talked about several things. He shared a wonderful story about growing up and the role of his grandparents in actually giving him encouragement and guidance. And just the role of, the very important role of having an adult that's helping you explore new things. They were both hands-on learners, and so he learned all sorts of things from them. But it was in large part because his parents were in very, they had professional careers and education paths, and so they were not as accessible. So he then tied that to his own personal story about, even though he went on to get a doctorate in marine science, it was the struggle between wanting to teach an education or versus other jobs that have a higher earnings potential. And that is really a struggle we have to address in this systemically in terms of how do we get highly qualified professionals of color, give them the opportunity to attract them into education. And he also talked about demystifying STEM. So how do we look at the intersection of science and life and help young people have all of those questions about why something happens and tie it to an interest and really make it relevant to them. Go out and take the sample of water, take it in, do water samples in the lab. For him, that led to his love of marine science. And just a couple of other really important things. One, we talked again with Crystal about the fact that libraries can play a very crucial role in being a safe place for young people to explore something new, spend time with their peers, and have access to trusted adults. And then lastly, and really importantly, I think from a systemic point of view, is this idea of who are the decision makers that are at the table in education? So are those faces too similar right now? And who is missing? Because if we don't have inclusive leadership, we're not going to have inclusive strategies. So that's a little bit of a wrap up from last week. I am getting my pens ready and I'll turn it back to you, Andrea.
All right, thank you, Ann. So today's conversation is focused on the high school experience, but we acknowledge that none of this work can be done in a vacuum if we want it to be effective, right? There are a myriad of factors that precede and follow the high school experience. And so some of those may also come up in our conversation today. The bios for the panelists should have been sent to you in advance. After the keynote, though, they will come on and briefly introduce themselves. But now I'd like to introduce you to our keynote today. Danielle Binion is the Director for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the University of Kansas Medical Center. Prior to that, she spent 8 years at Prep KC, collaborating with school districts, post-secondary institutions, philanthropy, and business to support STEM program access and development. Danielle, take it away.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you all for having me today. I apologize for my voice. It is a little raspy. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm looking forward to the panel discussions. Today, I'll share some insights over my 17-year spanning career in nonprofit, public health, and higher education. And the title is A Bridge Too Far, ? Critical Lessons Learned in STEM and STEM Recruitment and Retention. I wanted to start with this quote by Albert Einstein: "In the middle of difficulty lies opportunity." And whether it's difficulty during the pandemic that we've all faced, shifting the way we learn, interact, or enact policies, or thinking about real versus perceived barriers, there's always opportunity. And some of my favorite opportunities this past year has been intercampus learning. Multi-campus institutions have begun to collaborate more across disciplines, across locations due to increased distance learning. And then there's been multiple measures to look at admissions and assessment, which has really led to record-breaking rates for diversity within entering classes. For example, at the School of Medicine at KU Medical Center, they are entering their first largest diverse class for especially students of color in this class. So this all helps to expand equity and create opportunity. Next slide. Our role as educators, community advocates, and change agents is to grow the next generation and cultivate talent. That's what we do. We live and breathe that. And we've been doing that in many ways, in and out of school time, but the bridge sometimes still seems too far, and not by any deficiencies that our students have, but by the system. And this quote says, "All change is not growth, as all movement is not forward," by Ellen Glasgow. Next slide. We all know what the data says, right? And I wanted to just give a snippet of this, that some of the data in science and engineering in terms of degree conferment shows that movement is not growth. There is incremental movement, there is increases. We see the line graph seems like it's trending upwards. However, when we break down data, it helps to create more equity. And we know that the data never tends to tell the entire story. So this depiction here is for Missouri, and you'll see the next slide shows for Kansas. And both, as I said, show trends upward. And the next slide will show kind of just a summary that in comparison, our states, Missouri and Kansas, are in the 4th quartile for the US in terms of degrees conferred for science and engineering for STEM. And it shows that we have some more intentional work to do. Even though those trends are going up, there are dips between 2018 and 2019. And all demographic groups seem to be moving forward, but we know that African-American students, Hispanic and Latinx students, the statistics are still incremental, as shown in the next slide. That first bar is for women. And then you have subsequent bars for African-American students and Latinx Hispanic students. So you see there lots of work still to be done. And we might ask ourselves why, as we progress in the presentation. We're doing so much, right? We're doing so much in and out of school time. We have all of the programs, we have the grant funds, we have the coalitions. Next slide. Next slide. And we have all of our focus on college and career, right? We have created the roadmap for success. We know that we need to introduce students and make them aware of the opportunities. We know that we need to provide exposure and experiential learning. And then we really need to hone in on their preparation and ensuring that they have access to dual credit programs, to certifications, to client project work, to get to that opportunity of them thriving in a college and career. But what you'll notice in the bottom of this graphic is a bomb going off. What we don't account for is the culture, and whether it's the culture in the institutions that we're all in. We haven't accounted for imposter syndrome, and we haven't accounted for unconscious bias that our students will face in these environments. And we haven't really accounted for these gatekeepers, which are adults. And so that tends to really blow things up, make the bridge seem really far, and we really need to figure out some new ways to support students. Next slide. So for example, when we think about culture for districts, post-secondary institutions, and companies, some of these opportunities, there are not a lot of DEI related work that has been done in those spaces and places where our students are accepted for who they are and where they see themselves at every level within those companies and within those institutions. So for example, I was working with partners to create a STEAM focused program for students where students would be in a work site environment taking coursework. While students are engaging in their own conversation, kind of their downtime, we know students have their own language and their own way of talking with each other. And as they're talking to each other, the student says, in reference to the bathroom, "I'm going to blow up this bathroom." Now, those who have been around high school students, you might be scratching your head or you might even be giggling right now because we know that means a student has to go to the bathroom. Well, because the culture and the environment wasn't so much supportive and understanding of the language that students use, that was taken quite literally. And the student was questioned. There was some bias involved there. And ultimately, the student wasn't allowed to come back on campus. And from that, what we learn is when we're bringing students into these environments, we also need to prepare the environments, the adults in the environment, whether it's training opportunities or some development around bias. Another example is imposter syndrome. So a lot of times, even as adults, but definitely within students, I've seen students really look at themselves as not feeling like they belong, whether that's belonging at the post-secondary institution where they're taking dual credit classes or the work site where they're interning, especially if they're not seeing folks in those spaces and places that look like them. And so often we have students questioning, despite the success they've garnered to get to where they are, the support that they have and the advocates that they have, whether it's in intermediaries or within their school settings, they might still question why are they there. And we have to really work with students to give them a full sense of their why and encourage them to follow their passions, but also give them the tools to counteract any of that imposter syndrome. For example, I had a student who really kind of progressed through all of the opportunities provided, did really well, made it to a PhD program, but then still couldn't see themselves there. And in terms of unconscious bias, there are microaggressions and racism and white supremacy in the environment that students are entering. So we have to ensure that our adults, the people that we are providing advocacy for students, that we're truly mentors. Next slide. So how do we do that? We do that by confronting oppressive mindsets and inequitable mindsets, examining the intersections of education and workforce inequities. Do we really see people of color at the top of these post-secondary institutions or companies where we're placing students? Dismantling the policies and systems of oppression that historically leave behind specific communities, and then rebuild pathways of engagement to ensure that we're providing more robust and culturally appropriate connections for our students. And I'll close with this slide before we go to our discussion is, just try new things. Don't be afraid. We need to step outside of our comfort zones and soar, and our students will soar as we are soaring as well. And I'll close off there so that we have time for our discussion.
Danielle, thank you so much. That was really wonderful. And it gave us a lot to think about and hopefully a lot to talk about as we move into this conversation. I really love that, the bomb example. I think there was quite a lot in that. So if our panelists can go ahead and turn their cameras on, and of course, I'll invite Danielle to stay as part of this conversation. I'd love for you guys to, the three that are coming on, if you don't mind just introducing yourself quickly, your affiliation, where you work, and just maybe one concept as it relates to closing the racial gap in STEM that you want to make sure that we address. So we'll start with Nakaya, sorry about that.
Hi, I'm Nakaya Woodley, and I am on the Park Hill South Robotics team. And a phrase that I would use is start with the student's interest and don't choose their interest for them.
Thank you. Mr. Brown.
Hi, my name is Marcus Brown, and I am the lead facilitator at the Kansas City Digital Media Lab, Southeast Branch Public Library. And one of the things that I believe we need to really look at is either connecting the dots or removing the dots in that STEM. Not sure how to quite describe it, but we're not really meshing those words, those letters and those words together accurately. So that's what I think we need to look at.
Great, thank you. And Oz?
Hello, my name is Oz Qureshi. I'm the program director at MindDrive. And I would say that what I would say is more is not enough. What we've done isn't enough. And just doing more, in my opinion, is not enough. We got to do a lot more. And to address kind of what Danielle represented in her presentation, it's going to take a lot more.
Absolutely. All right, well, thank you. All right, so we're going to just jump in. And as I said to you all previously, if you hear something that someone else says and we want to go with it, feel free to do that. But we're going to start with Nakaya. I understand congratulations are in order because you just received the highest award that FIRST gives to an individual, right? The highest honor, which was the Dean's List Award. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And if you don't mind sharing with us how you got involved in robotics and what keeps you coming back to it, what keeps you engaged?
I first got involved during my 4th grade year. I just moved to Hawaii and I was still kind of just getting used to everything and I didn't really know where to go. And the teacher invited me to one of his enrichment classes where he introduced the idea of robotics to me and invited me to come to one of the meetings after school. And from there, I just fell in love with robotics and everything about it and have just kept coming ever since, because just being able to figure out how things work and being able to put them together is just really fun to see how it comes out.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. We're glad you stayed with it and we look forward to seeing what you do as you keep moving forward. So I'm going to ask this question really to everybody, but I'm going to start with Marcus and Oz. But if you guys, we're talking about closing the racial gap in STEM on this panel. And I'm wondering if you guys feel like there are unique ways in which you close this gap for kids of color. And I ask that with a little bit of a bias because I do feel like that you close it in the same way you close it for other kids. You make it relevant, you make it interesting, but I'm curious to know what your perspective is on that and if you've had to do anything unique to attract kids of color.
Well, I'll just start and just kind of backtrack when we're talking about kids of color. One of the things that we know is that from grades 1 to 3, we go to school to learn how to read, to learn how to write, to learn how to count. And then from grades 4 on, we're using those tools to learn. And so if you haven't acquired those tools by 3rd grade, 4th grade, then you're going to struggle with a lot of processes. And as we know, as we juxtapose that against the whole prisoner pipeline setup, where we can foresee that if we see these young men failing at this grade, then this tends to be a good area to build a prison. And so if we took those same statistics and on the back end applied it with something thoughtful and futuristic for the young people and not just for the profiteers, that might be one just way to really look at it. The other piece that, since we're talking about grade school, is we miss the fact that elementary school age teachers are really, really great liberal arts teachers. And so they have to be adept in all subjects and they have to juggle a lot of hats. And then we somehow think that that's not a good model for middle and high school students to have that type of relationship and have that type of instructor that is, fully versed in all of these subjects. We compartmentalize and then we disconnect the education from any other activity that is taking place in this child's life. So I'm going to stop there because I got a whole lot to say. So I want to let somebody else get in.
Thank you. All right, Oz, you have some.
Yeah, I would follow that up by saying, we have to be intentional and we have to do the work. Like, it's one thing to create an interesting program. It's one thing to set up an interesting space. That alone isn't enough. Like, you got to get out there. You got to be intentional about where you're trying to find young people that you want to be involved or that you want to try and work with. And you just got to get out there and you got to do the work. I look at it like, I use the overflowing faucet sink analogy. Like the sink's overflowing. There's something's broke and it's flooding up the kitchen. And what we've done is we created some really interesting mops and mop buckets, but we haven't really committed ourselves to figuring out how to shut off the faucet. And that requires getting wet. It requires getting messy. It requires getting in there and really figuring it out. And not each demographic is the same. Not all young people within each demographic are the same. And trying to find young people where they're at and figure out what motivates them, and then doing the work that like speaking to what Danielle was presenting on. It's we run up against that so much. The cultural bias, the gatekeepers, the imposter syndrome is something we face right off the back. Like, how do you help young people feel like this is a place where they belong and this is a place where they can be successful? Like, that's where that. And again, I'll stop too because I could go on. I
love it though. Good stuff.
I like to add there too, Andrea, if I can. When we're kind of talking about deconstructing, right? Like how we already see education, and two, words that came out from Marcus was relevant and relationships. That resonates with me because I think we need to ensure that students really see themselves when they walk in these programs, whether it's pictures of people that look like them on the walls or introducing them to people that look like them at every level of the company or institution. I think that matters. And then the work should be something that interests students. Is there some kind of current activity for a client project that relates to the culture of the students who are engaged in the program? How do we make it relevant to their interest and what they might be experiencing through their lived experience? And I think really great teachers do that already. Like Marcus said, the liberal arts related teachers do this all the time really well, and we can learn from them as well.
I'd like to, Nakaya, did you want to add anything to that, or you don't have to?
No, not really. You guys fit it out really well.
Well, I just wanted to jump on that, Mr. Brown, and I work with Marcus, so I tend to call him Mr. Brown in the workspace with kids, so that's why that's in my head. But Marcus, you talked about removing the periods between the S, T, E, and M, and I'd like for you to talk a little bit more about what you want to see happen with that.
Well, science, technology, engineering, and math, they're disconnected when they should be connected. So if I'm making, say, a dress, I'm not necessarily thinking about the math that is involved. If I'm studying, navigation, I'm not thinking about the math involved. So we've right here separated the idea that math is somehow separated from anything else that you do in life. And so that becomes the big thing. And just even how we meet it out. So we go to school all day and it's required to have math and science, but it's not required to have a first program that is available to students throughout the academic day. So it tends to be a club. And so if I play football or if I play basketball, there's no way that I could participate in first going zones because those seasons butt up against each other. And so if we were really looking at melding these things together, then it wouldn't be an opportunity that I could only take advantage of after school. It would be something that I could fully take advantage of throughout the day. And it would be fully integrated in the curriculum. We will be going back to shop and home economics, where I'm measuring tablespoons and teaspoons. And I learned how to sew and cut fabric and know what a square foot is and know different grains of sandpaper. So we will get back to those things that have us having practical use of the knowledge that we're learning right now, not something that we're supposed to somehow pull off the shelf and make use of at the end of the school year or at any other point in life. So that becomes the thing.
Yeah,
So,
thank you. I appreciate that. Does anybody have a jump on any of what he has said and add a comment?
Yeah, Marcus is really talking about that integration. And I think it comes up a lot now in the real world learning talk, but there has to be real integration of what we're learning and what we need in everyday life. So could there be some examples of what Marcus is saying with also the sports, with basketball and football? And in terms of modeling out the field or doing measurements in some kind of way as well to apply for the athletes or students who aren't athletes but are interested in sports.
Yeah, and I would take that.
There's a whole field called sports science, but we're not really meshing that with our scholar athletes.
And I would take that a step further and say that if you play sports or are involved in some of those types of activities, you have access to facilities and equipment where you can practice and train and get better. And when you get into some of the STEM competitions, like how do you get better at flying a drone unless you have access to that equipment? And what do you do when you break it? Or how do you get better at coding unless you have access to the right type of equipment where you can continue to work at that craft?
Right.
And expertise.
Exactly. So let's ask, because you guys have mentioned gatekeepers quite a bit, and that has been a consistent theme throughout this series, this idea of gatekeepers, adults, right, who have, impact on this process. And sometimes they're gatekeepers in preventing you to have access, and sometimes they're trusted adults that make the links that you need in order to be connected to this. And I'd like to throw this to Nakaya in terms of, if you could tell us about maybe adults in your life that have either had a positive or negative impact on your interest in this work and how you move through that space.
For the positive side, almost all of my coaches and a lot of the female teammates that I was with on my robotics team now, they helped me be able to just keep going and and understand if I had a problem or anything with something going on, like if I was confused on something going on with the robot, they could help me out with it, or just being able to just be there to help talk to someone if I was just going through something that day, or just not really going through imposter syndrome, almost like not really wanting to say it, but just having someone there who could help me keep moving on and being able to stay on the team. And even through all the negative experiences, and as being a female and also as a minority as well, there's a lot of just negative experiences, just being told that, oh, are you sure this is what you want to go into? Or, oh, this is such a sophisticated field, are you sure you're smart enough to do that? It's just a lot of being asked and being doubted just because of how the stereotypes almost. And
so what it sounds like you're talking about are those microaggressions, because this is something that you've had people say to you while you're out there doing this work, right?
Yeah.
But they say it probably casually, or I'm asking, is that kind of how
it comes off as casual, but as to me, it's more of a microaggression, but I don't think that they really realize how much of a microaggression it actually is to be asked that.
Fantastic. Anybody else want to comment on those gatekeepers? I think in terms of thinking of it in terms of parents, teachers, kind of what are the role of these adults in this process?
I was going to say the state. talking about ultimate gatekeepers.
Okay.
Just in the sense that we're stuck in this linear way of how thinking and learning takes place, and this number of lecture hours that needs to happen between each subject. And so if there's two thoughtful teachers that want to coalesce around a subject or an idea, we couldn't necessarily do that based off of the number of seat hours this student is supposed to have in a particular subject. And so that becomes a piece. The other one is the union. And so when a teacher wants to be thoughtful in the process and extend their day outside of what might take place in the classroom, now I can't be thoughtful in that process because I'm handcuffed by the contractual agreements that we have. So those are just two ways to look at it. The state says that these kids can't walk across the street from the Southeast campus to the Kansas City Public Library and then take advantage of the media lab. These 16 to 17-year-old kids that work jobs and have family responsibilities can't walk a block and a half because they can't be trusted. And we can't think about how the library or Mind Drive can help these young people acquire some credits, some hands-on activities to supplement some of the tools and resources that the schools don't have and access to, or the expertise that they don't have access to. So it's those things where they keep things so rigid that they can't realize how there's community entities that could be benefiting them moving their ball forward.
Yeah, thank you. Oz, did you want to add to that?
Well, I think it is a lot, right? And we run up against it a lot. And what comes to mind is some of the competitions and activities that we get involved in. Just right off the back, they can be set up in a way in which it just makes it really hard for us to get young people able to participate, either by the way in which the competition is structured, or especially during the pandemic when you had to have everybody had to basically log in with a personal email, and then the verification process to that. It seemed like competitions were being structured with the idea that every kid would have access to their own equipment and their own computer and their own device that would adequately run the function. And when you're trying to help, when you're trying to bring that and help and guide young people, and they're located all over the place, that's hard, that's difficult. And then you get into how the competitions themselves get structured and those gatekeepers that are involved in those. And yeah, it can be a lot.
So can I ask, because you had mentioned, as you had talked a little bit about parents, right? And what you have to do to help parents feel comfortable about sending their kids to some of these competitions. Can you share a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So we participate in these electric racing competitions with these cars, like what's in my background, and the competitions are out in the middle of Kansas, in small rural communities in the middle of Kansas. And regardless, there are 4 hours, and then one trip 7 hours away. And so a lot of our students, especially our Latinx students, their families are apprehensive. It'd be the best way of putting it, as far as letting them, travel out to rural Kansas. And it takes a lot from a lot of work on our ends. And not that we wouldn't do it anyways, but you have to do the work necessary to get the trust of the parent and the family to make sure that they know that this is okay. This is going to be okay. I can send my students with this group. I can send my kids with this group, and they're going to come back and they're going to be fine, and they're not going to run into issues. And unfortunately, we've had our share of issues on these trips, and that also makes it difficult, because you do the work necessary to get the trust and the consent from mom and dad that, yes, my kid's going to be okay with you out on this trip. And then you have an issue, you run into an issue where they experience racism, and it's, yeah, and that just makes it complicated and difficult.
Absolutely.
Let alone just trying to win or be competitive and compete and just have fun being, doing this science stuff.
Right.
And I would add to what Oz is saying is, like, be cognizant of what the parents are worried about, right? And speak to that. So if it's racism, if it's safety, like, be understanding of their perspective, speak to that and talk them through, like, your plans. Because I think sometimes people in the education space or outsiders who don't understand that perspective might think that the parent is being a gatekeeper in a negative way. So, oh, your parent just don't want you to be involved. I don't understand that. But really think about the context and the historical context and why a parent would be very cautious about their student who is a student of color going into rural areas.
Right. So Nakaya, I'm curious, because we've talked about this gatekeeper conversation quite a bit, and we've heard from other panelists, that sometimes folks in the school who determine whether a young person should be assigned to a program or should have access to it, decide that these students wouldn't be interested. What might you say to those individuals?
I would say, from personal experience as well, just set up one camp or set up a little just day camp or just something for kids to come to and have little STEM projects or different things just to get them introduced to STEM in a way, and have them actually see if they actually like that, and if they're not interested, then great, that they were right. But if they are interested, that's something that can open a whole new field of future studies for them. And it's just a really great way to figure out a new way to bring in more interest into schools, basically, in order to just do that.
Fantastic. And then I know the other gatekeeper is the teacher, right? We talked about parents, teachers, and I know, Danielle, you have some strong feelings about the role of teachers in this process, or how we can better support teachers. Would you share that?
Sure, happy to. I think sometimes we don't amplify teacher voice enough and advocate for them. Teachers are experts in their field, and we want them to be all things to all people. And so what are some opportunities that we can provide professional development or experiential learning outside of the classroom where they're an expert as well in some other areas of interest? So teachers can scale these opportunities for students because teachers know and have the relationships, right? They have the relationships with the parents, they have the relationships with the students. So how do we better empower and amplify their voice and give them some of the skills they need to scale STEM in a way that's powerful in the classroom?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, that seems to be a point of contention in all of these conversations, is how do we as adults create environments that help to move these initiatives forward, right? Whether it's at the state level, the teachers, the parents, it's like we're the ones who are the problem here. And how do we rectify that? So I'm just curious if any of you have any last thoughts that you want the participants to consider as we talk about closing the racial gap, and specifically for high school students, but in general, we can talk about it.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Well, the first thing that we have to do is start really just checking those basic skills at the door. When those freshmen come in, hey, 8 times 7, you go this way, you can't answer that question. 8 times 7, you answer, we have too many young people matriculating through these school systems that don't have basic skills. We have young people sitting in Algebra 1 and Algebra 2 classes that don't know basic multiplication and fractions. And so we're not really giving them a chance, and we're not remediating, and we're trying to teach now. They don't have a problem with understanding the algebraic concepts and the geometry concepts, but it just take them too long to do the work, or they become disinterested because they're not, floating with their other classmates. So really addressing those basic skills when we get there. We can't spend 4 years spinning our wheels with these young people. That becomes a big thing. The other thing, listening to the young lady talk, wow, your name was just up there, but I'm not going to butcher it. But, she got involved with this in the 4th grade. And so one of the things is, particularly with our young Black males, is that we don't catch them before they come to school, too cool for school or too cool to learn. And so I think that that's really critical in this process, is catching these young people before they just become too cool and too disinterested in the process to really dig in. And then also to understand that this is work. Everything is not, Sesame Street. Some stuff does take you really digging in and having some discipline if you really want it in your life. And that's the other thing that our young people have to understand, you got to dig in. So I'm gonna stop there and let somebody else talk. I do got a few more things though, so we'll see on time.
I'd say two areas I'd like to share is one, focusing more on teacher retention and recruitment, and then what happens also with our students when they get to post-secondary or these industry sites, having really great conversations with industry about their DEI, the DEI work that they're doing before we place students there. And with that teacher recruitment and retention, how are we really supporting teachers to be great, to advocate for them and recruit more teachers of color is an area that I think is really important. And then the other area is just allowing students and their families to have voice. So how do we create this same environment that we're having right now, this really great discussion, but really student-centered? All students, all families on the call, them interacting as panelists, and we really listen to understand what their needs are.
Thank you. Anybody else? Oz or Nakaya?
I just want to say, at least from a student perspective, as I said in the beginning, don't choose the students' interests for them, because in the end, you're not going to get anywhere with that. You're just going to have students, like what Marcus said, that are just going to be coming to school, but they don't know any basic skills. They don't know mostly anything that they probably could know, because schools are just basically choosing what they want for them. And having students be able to choose their own interest and figuring out what they want to do in life on their own, and being able to obviously have help on the side, but mainly being guided by themselves to figure out what they want to do would open up a lot more doorways, and probably open up a lot more fields of study in both schools and being able to just out in real life as well.
Fantastic, thank you.
And I would say from my experience, there are plenty of Black and brown kids that want to do this, students that want to do these programs. It is our job to find them, to make them feel welcome, and to make them feel like that they can be successful in our programs. And that's how I approach it. And then I would piggyback on what Danielle said, as far as teacher support goes, because I see a lot of like STEM activities and STEM programs that pop up or get created, or these competitions that you can get involved in, but it all relies on a teacher at the school doing something else, doing another thing. Then they're already being asked to do 85 million things in a week in which they can do maybe 5. So there's so much work being placed on teachers, and unfortunately, I feel like sometimes with some of the programs that are available, it's just another ask that somebody's got to do, and how can we ask them to do more, especially on the heels of this year we just experienced.
Right. Okay. Very solid points. And what's interesting about that, Oz, too, goes back to what Marcus was saying. But if we release them from all of these things that they have to do, maybe they could have the time to be really excited about some of this other stuff that they may want to do. But those are some bigger state level conversations we probably need to be having as well. So I'm going to turn this over to Chrissy for the Q&A, because I'm sure there are questions from our participants. We want to give you time for that. So Chrissy.
Thank you, Andrea. And you know what? Oz just opened the door perfectly for this first question. His last statement was, we have to find them and make them feel welcome. That's a call to action right there. Find those students and make them feel welcome. So Oz, in line with that question, you said more is not enough. Do we need to do more, or do we need to do different to engage these students?
That's a good question. I would say what my point was that it's not enough to just do more. We got to do a lot more. And I don't know that it's necessarily different. I feel like the students we work with, they want to do what we do. They find their passion, they get excited about it, but there isn't the same cultural network of support to help them through all of the different obstacles and barriers that they need to get through in order to be successful. because I think that that's part of it. Just like somebody mentioned earlier, you got to be able to see yourself. You got to be able to believe that it's possible. Like all of us, I feel like young people know what they're supposed to do, right? We don't do it. It's not that we don't know. It's that we don't believe. We don't believe that if we try, it's going to make a difference. We don't believe that if I go over here and try this new program, like anybody who's ever gone to a high school to do any kind of recruiting knows what happens when you sit in the lunchroom. They don't talk to you. You're not going to come up and say, you got to go to them, and you got to be consistent, and you got to be there long enough until they feel like comfortable, just like, you know, meeting them on their level. And that's what I feel like we have a lot of issues to solve, right, in our society, a few. And this is no different than any of it's a lot, and there's a lot of issues around it that make it difficult that we have to address. And so that's where I feel like it's not enough to just create the next program. Just creating the program is not going to change anything. It's not going to get the kids that we're looking for in the door. You got to go out and figure out how to push down the barriers to allow those kids that we want to reach to be successful.
Absolutely. Pushing down barriers. Thank you. A question for Nakia. What kept you interested in robotics?
Just the whole going to competitions and seeing the excitement and just seeing something that took months to build, do what you wanted to do and exceed, and just being able to have a second family almost. Because in FRC, the amount of hours you spend building and the amount of late nights, you honestly build a second family almost with the people that you spend time with and the people on the team. And that's what's mainly kept me stay on the team.
Thank you, Nakia. Thank you very much. I apologize for messing your name up. Thank you very much, Nakia. So this is a question. I'm going to open this one up for everyone. How do you intervene when you observe or hear a microaggression? I'm gonna let Andrea take that one first. The face she made me think she has the answer for, so I'm gonna let her take that first.
No, I just thought that was a really great question. Well, you know, are you talking? I assume that you're asking in terms of if we see it happening to youth, right? And again, I think it's about modeling an opportunity, right? Because I feel like it's important to address it immediately. And sometimes this can be difficult, but I feel like it's important to address it in front of the student, because I think it's important for the student to understand that something here went awry. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important for the adult to hear it, but of course you have to do it in a way, depending on the situation, that is professional as possible. So for me, it's about taking that deep breath and then just redirecting and saying, oh, that's interesting that you said that. Why do you feel that way? Or no, I actually disagree. I think that these students very much have it within them to do this particular thing, right? So, and it also for me depends on the relationship I have with the person too, in terms of how deeper we can go into that conversation. But I'm happy to hear what other folks have to say as well.
Marcus,
agree.
Go
ahead.
No, Danielle, you go ahead. I was coming to you next. And then Marcus, he made a face. It looks like he knows something too. But Danielle, I'm going to go to you next, and then we'll let Marcus wrap this one up for us.
I think it's important to clarify, like Andrea is saying, because I think it's a learning opportunity as well. So I really want to make visible what seems to be invisible or underneath the surface. And then really differentiate between their intent and the impact, because words matter and people need to understand exactly what they said and what it is. And, you know, understanding that it is a microaggression or invalidation or insult, or racism, just plain racism. And then I really try to promote empathy and education, but it depends on the situation. And it can also depend if I'm on the receiving end of that microaggression, right? So things might not be that clear cut and easy, but I think it's also important to get people to understand ownership and accountability, so that there can be some sort of resolution.
Yeah. Marcus, wrap this one up for us.
Well, you know, and it's that world that often people that have been put in a category have to to live in, or people that are least represented have to live in. It's that always that double take. Did I hear what I just heard? Did I see what I just saw? And so that becomes that thing that we always have to be cognizant of, and then have those pre-conversations about, hey, so when we get in here, kind of like, well, you know, when we were little, you know, you're not getting anything in the store today. You got to have that pre-conversation. You're not getting any candy. You're not getting a toy. I mean, not in that, but just that pre-conversation when we take a group of young people into a different environment, and that other conversations that we have to have, and that other education that as women or as youth or as minorities, if you will, we shouldn't always have to have, but we have to think about the layer of education when we're involving ourselves in these environments. And then it does sometimes as an adult become, you know, because we're human. And anyway, I'll just stop there.
Thank you guys. Andrea, go ahead and wrap it up for us.
Okay. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and wrap up the official conversation for you all that have to maybe go back to work. And thank you for coming, and thank you for, on behalf of the KC STEM Alliance, for being a part of this series. We do have one more next week, kind of our culminating conversation. So I hope that you can come back for that. And if you have time to stay for an additional 10 minutes, I think all of our panelists have agreed that they can stay on and continue to answer some of the questions that you've provided. But otherwise, have a wonderful day, and hopefully we'll see you next week. All right, now we'll go back to the Q&A.
All right, I got some good ones here. So hopefully some were able to stay and get engaged in this final portion of the conversation. So I'm going to start with the question that's for Marcus. How do we change the state policies to support more integrated learning? Just give me like the first, what do you think the first step is in making change?
I think the biggest first step is to organize teachers and parents around the idea that the tail doesn't need to wag the dog. You know, we're here locally, and we're saying that what's happening, changing our community for the better. What's happening at a state level is not helping us build better relationships with parents and teachers and students. And so I think that has to be where that's where the agency in us is, and that's where the work is being done. It's that coalition between teachers and parents, and this thing where we have to realize that we're not at odds. I can't imagine the teacher that says, wow, I want to go to school and get a degree to ruin kids' lives. It happens, but I don't imagine they set out to do that. I can't imagine the parent that said, I can't wait to send my child to school to disrupt learning for everyone. And so, but it happens. And so now, how do we stop bashing each other and really be honest about where we are and recognize that this thing is not working for a lot of people? And so it's not your fault per se, but who is keeping us from really addressing this? It's not the teacher, it's not the parent, it's the state. And so if we coalesce at that level, they have to listen to us, because otherwise, what are you doing other than the will of the people? Whose bidding are you doing if you're not doing ours? And so that becomes the conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Marcus. I'm going to open this next question I want this to be for Danielle and Oz. Danielle, if you could kick us off. What areas of STEM are most affected by lack of access?
Say all of them, but I think computer science first comes to mind. It seems like when I say we, minorities, I identify as a Black woman, a woman of color. It feels like we got to the game late in terms of understanding where computer science was going and being prepared for it. Like some of our high schools weren't equipped to teach us and give us the skill set academically, as well as socially to engage in, learning for computer science. So that really sticks out to me. And that's a lot of the work I was doing in my previous role, to take away and remove those barriers and create more computer scientists, networkers, that broad, professionals of color.
Awesome, thank you. Oz, can you add a little more to what Danielle said?
Yeah, I would say that's why you see all these esports arenas going up in the suburbs, right? It's like, I see esports as like an offshoot of computer science. It's like, that's what you can get into if you want to like be a game designer, or if you like coding, or if you just like messing with computers, like you're probably gaming. And what access in esports is huge. It's like blowing up right now. And how do we bring that to the students in the schools that we work with? It's I mean, we're going to launch an esports team next year, but we're only going to be able to probably reach 10 to 15 kids. That's not, it's not nothing, but it's not a whole bunch. But I would say robotics probably I'd put next, would just, that one comes to mind as far as like especially when I see at least the robotics competitions that we're involved in, not necessarily first. I can't speak to that because I haven't really been to a lot of first competitions, and we do support a lot of first teams. But the robotics competitions that we do, it's just heavy. It's heavy suburban schools, and it's and again, it's tough to get those programs, launched in places where we could change that in a significant way, right? Like we do drones, and I consider drones to be a robotics program. These are robots that fly and they're piloted a different kind of way. And the biggest issue with that is I got to get that equipment into the hands of that kid where he can or she can practice, not just at the 2 hours there with me a week, or they're not going to get, they're not going to get good enough, or they're not going to have enough of a time to get the experience they need to really compete the way that they want to compete, because young people want to do well. They don't necessarily all want to win all the time, but they want to do well. They want to represent. So I don't know if I helped or not, but that was what I thought of.
No, that was perfect. Highlighting the connection between computer science and esports. And then again, you always wrap up so well. All young people want to do well. So they want to feel like they're in a space where they can be successful. Thank you so much for that, Oz. These next couple of questions are around imposter syndrome. Danielle first introduced this to me, and because she was so kind, we were talking about having good friends, to tell me I had that. And at first I was like, no, I don't. Then yeah, I do. So I'm going to ask first to Nakaya, what's your advice to students who deal with imposter syndrome?
I would just say, although you're feeling that, like with the imposter syndrome, just stick it out for a little while longer. Because that's how I was feeling once I moved here and not really seeing any other people of color on the team. And my freshman year, I was just really unsure if I wanted to stay there. And my parents, along with my coaches, both told me to just stick it out for a little while longer. And now I've been doing it for the whole almost 4 years of this upcoming year.
Very good.
Can I just add, Chrissy, that imposter syndrome, I have found it at every age, at every level. This is a real thing in our culture in general, where people are just not feeling like they're worthy. And so I think sometimes it's good for other people to hear that and know it. It's like, well, no, we're all doing the best we can, and we all know more than we think we do.
Especially at the student level, I feel like a lot of kids go through that, which is why there's also not a lot of students of color on a bunch of on STEM teams as well, because we're not represented in that. So if there's someone actually on the student level along that can actually feel their pain, I guess, then we wouldn't probably be going through as much imposter syndrome as we should at that age, I guess.
Oh, that's a great point, Nakai. Great point. Well, Dr. Danielle is the one that diagnosed me, so I'm ready for the cure. What's the cure, Danielle? What do you think helps us move past this?
I don't know if there is a cure. Like Andrea said, it's at every stage and at every level. But I think I'm always a person that wants to speak truth to power. So I think arming students with understanding what imposter syndrome is, how it shows up, students and adults, like what it actually looks like. And then Nakia said it, like persistence is one of the ingredients to move past it. And then having a village, right? Those people that those 2 or 3 people you can call and say, I'm seeing this, I'm feeling this. And they say, oh no, you got it. You achieved this and this, you have the skill set, like you belong there. And I think that cheerleading corner is important at every level.
And I think that is a great way to wrap up this conversation, that cheerleading corner. Our kids need that. We all need that. So thank you, Danielle, for that final thought. So this ends our closing session. I hope that you all are able to join us next week as we wrap up all this work that we've done into, I'm not going to say a nice, neat package. I hope we're never going to wrap this up into a nice, neat package, but we'll end this conversation next week and prepare for the next conversation. So I do hope that you all can join us then. And so for now, I'll bid you all a great day and we'll see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you to all the
Thanks.
panelists. You guys were fabulous. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, panelists. We appreciate you. Great conversation.